But it's not just that. I hate the modern architecture they replace it with. I really do. And it's because in part of what it represents. A shallow and meaningless culture. I mean, people hate 60s architecture, but let me tell you something about 60s architecture. It was planned for people. Back then, they were in a kind of a planning mindset, and they would sit down and they would actually think, they'd attempt to think in a socially responsible way, how will this building affect people? What will it do for them? How will people interact with this space? And because they were thinking about people and space in a very interactive way, they came up with some really interesting spatial arrangements. One thing you have to say about the 60s is they came up with some interesting multi-level approaches to things. You know, the 60s gave us overpasses and underpasses. It gave us big spiral ramps. It gave us people looking at things from lots of different vantage points because they were at different levels and they were moving up and down levels. And it gave us a more three-dimensional approach to people moving through a city, you know? And it started thinking about how can people move through the city efficiently. Now, it didn't necessarily think very well about how the more nefarious aspects of the city might move. And people have become paranoid and phobic about underpasses and overpasses, particularly at night. But the truth of the matter is they're dangerous only because people don't use them. You know, if the gangs who they believe hang out in these places were used to people walking down them, they'd either not be there or they'd behave themselves when they were there. It's because people fearing these areas avoid them, they become isolated. Because the police never randomly decide to go down for a walk through the underpass because they're as scared of it as everyone else. It's because people allow fear to rule their lives. And because these problems have never been addressed. We've simply abandoned any area we've seen as dangerous or any place we've seen someone intimidating, we've just walked the other way. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because, well, some of these people probably are up to nothing wrong, up to no evil act. Those who are will follow the reputation that we give those places and congregate there and use them to their advantage because we've already told them we think they're there. We've already told them we think that this is what they're doing there. And so, of course, they're going to think, this is our territory. '60s architecture had a lot of faults. The excessive overuse of the 90-degree angle, for instance. The very excessive use of concrete. But you can't fault them for really thinking about human beings' movement through a city. They thought about it. And Victorian architecture and the Industrial Revolution, the pre-Victorian architecture, has some wonderful quirks. I love Gothic architecture, so I'm biased, I guess. But one of the things I love about it is its eccentricity. The fragmented, fractured way, but it's all put together. It's very organic. It feels like it's grown rather than been put together on some grid, like someone putting Connect 4 down on a map of the city. And it was organic. People kind of vied for the biggest building, they vied for the nicest building. The egos of rich men made them, but also the good philanthropic um, desires of people made these buildings happen, these big city-wide buildings. Others were just purely functional, and they evolved to meet a function in the area. Now, people don't plan buildings in the modern world to meet functions. They assume people will come to use the function they create, because we live in a car-driven society. Back then, you created the building where the need for the function was. Now they build a shopping centre out of town and assume everyone will come to the shopping centre because of the function of the shopping centre. And there's a limit to how far that will go. There can only be so many places like that. There needs to be some places that are there to serve the people who would be there if it wasn't there anyway. And I guess that's a problem. You see, this Victorian architecture, for the vast majority of it, in some sense, it was made to serve the city. Modern architecture is made to serve itself, made to serve the selfish, the corporate, those who want to shift product. Like this water pool, this mirror pool, it's basically a featureless mass. If it had all the, if we put sculptures and trees, like there used to be trees there before they ripped them up, if we put park benches on that people could sit on and watch squirrels and fish and whatever it is that happens to be living in this pond, which will be nothing because it's only 3 inches deep, but if it were deep enough for it, if we actually allowed interesting features to be there that encouraged people to sit down and enjoy the space for its own right, then it would not be serving the purpose they want it to serve. They want a corporate space. They want something that will allow people to feel they're in a safe, pleasant environment, but that won't encourage them to sit down. Instead, they want them to look straight into shop windows. And if they stop, they want them to damn well stop at an outdoor cafe and sit on some Parisian-style table, drinking their cafe latte, and spending money, rather than eating sandwiches and drinking out of a thermos and chucking bread to the ducks. In short, it's a horrible, horrible commercial abomination. It's not public architecture at all. That's what I hate about it. It has no soul. It has no spirit for the people. It only exists to serve the interest of those who want money. Now, I'm not a... Actually, by many people's definition, I probably would be some sort of crazy anti-money socialist. I largely agree with Isaac Newton. If a man wishes to profit by science, give him a shilling and chuck him out of my class. Not that I'm saying money is bad, just that I'm saying there are some things that are more valuable than money, and that should be pursued for their own sake. Some things should always take precedent over money. And Victorian architecture, it was attempting to display glory. It was attempting to display something of the wonder of nature, of man's own ingenuity and creativeness, possibly, in fact, in many cases, considering some of it was basically Gothic, which more or less means based off churches in many aspects, in some cases displaying the glory of God. All commercial architecture does is provide a tiny blip in the landscape that makes you not feel that you're walking through a desert. that will maybe even draw your eye to some shop window. It's trying to project the image of modernity for modernity's sake, simply to say, yes, we are a modern city, we have arrived. Don't feel like you're in an old place. Well, actually, I'm not against being in an old place. I don't think the past and the future have to fight at each other and be at odds. Can't we have the best of both? So I can get quite angry about something as silly as architecture. But then, I've said before, if I was city architect or something like that, I'd probably try and make Bradford look like Gotham City. I like the industrial / techno / Gothic theme. And isn't that what Bradford needs? Industry? We've been so dependent upon finance and the financial sector, and we realised it was a fool's game. And we've built so many luxury houses, and I hope people are now realising that was a horrible folly. I mean, I'm not against everyone living in nice houses. If we could all live in nice houses, if we all had the energy and the time and the resources to build everyone a condo in the United Kingdom, I would be the first to say, let's build lovely houses. But since we live in this selfish world, where people don't do anything for anything without being paid for it, maybe we should have built some houses that people could actually afford. But the irony is we're so obsessed with not building on greenbelt land, not building out in the countryside and spoiling it. But we're perfectly happy to build on the countryside we have in the city and spoil it. You know, one of the great things about some British cities and towns is they have pockets of rural England. Well, not even rural England, of just plain old-fashioned nature inside of them. And I'm not just talking about city parks, I'm talking about all the trees and hedges and sidings. I'm talking about the rivers that run through our cities and need riverbanks. I'm talking about forests like Heaton Wood and copses and places like that. I'm talking about sports fields and short meadows in between urban areas that are basically becoming conurbations as they grow into each other. And these little pockets of meadow and heather and heathland and woodland are retained. They kind of form a little bubble inside the conurbation, and instead of treasuring that, we're willing to stamp all over it. I mean, it's fine if it's owned by a trust, but if it's just a little bit, if the bubble's quite small, or if people need it, they're perfectly happy to just dispense with the green land for the sake of a few more buildings. They don't see it as proper greenbelt land because there isn't a great vista.